Welcome to another episode of Under the Surface. I'm Levi Polzin, at Levi Oner on Instagram. Today we're going to be drawing a traditional American rose, a little how-to episode. Before we do that, got a couple new things that are going to be up for sale this week. My new peony print, which was created all on the iPad in Procreate, and this new Hanya print, and this tiger print. They're all printed on high quality watercolor paper, giclée printed, and are of the highest quality. I'll have them available up on my website soon. I also have a couple older prints. I think I only have one left of these peony prints, a couple of these cool Foo Dog peony still life prints. One of this Hanya bonsai, another one of this still life. A couple of these left for sure. They're kind of great, just as art in your house. And then a couple of my Hollywood series, where I put tattoos on classic Hollywood characters. All right, like I said, those will be available coming this week. So if you go check my Instagram at Levi Oner, I will be announcing when those will go up on sale this week. All right, let's get into it. All right. Just want to say I got some new sound equipment, so hopefully the sound will be real nice from here on out. So if that was an issue for you in the earlier episodes, it should be taken care of as of now. It's pretty cold in here, so I've got a heater going, so you may hear a little bit of them in the background, and I apologize for that. But hopefully the mic'd up system now should take care of most of that. All right, so we're going to start in Procreate and get right into this rose drawing. I'm going to try and detail not only just a general structure of how I would like to draw one of these, but kind of a breakdown of why they'll work great for any part of the body, and just some shapes and why we design it the way we should. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to just start once again with some shapes. I like using an orange pencil. I'm going to go into my faves, use the Nardia pencil, or however you pronounce that, Nardiar. So I'm going to just start here. Start with a line, because I know I want my rose to kind of be going at an angle. A circle. And then kind of start with some other circular shapes. And these are kind of just representing the petals that I know I'm going to be using. And so I know I've got my angle kind of going here, but I'm going to do another angle there, another one crossing across, and utilizing that one and down through here. So these are kind of playing off shapes that I know I'm going to want to use. Like we'll probably end up putting a leaf right there, maybe another one there, probably a little budded one there, maybe a longer one, budded rose here, yeah, and then a leaf, another leaf, probably a leaf over here, and then our stem. Might be a bit long. I'm going to go back on that. I don't quite like the length on that one. Or the shape, really. Pull it across a little bit more, down. So that's my general layout of where I want a lot of stuff to go. And you can see right there, same thing when I was doing the tiger, just even laying out shapes and general positioning of things. I've already got where I'm going to place a lot of this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pull in some other shapes here of where across the rows I know I want some things. Like I know I want a big overflapping petal to go there. Probably going to do one that goes across. Actually, we'll go like kind of make that heart center. I always like that classic heart center. I'll probably trim this up just a little bit. It's getting a little fat. But yeah, I mean, right there you can see we've pretty much got the basis for our entirety of what we're going to use. And that just goes back into really focusing on structure before we get into really the detail aspects of the drawing. I can't bring home much more of like how important I believe that is, because once you've got your layout, your structure, you know that the shapes and where everything is laying feels good to you, then you just have a lot less work for yourself in the end result of drawing it. So I'm going to go through, we're going to pencil it again here. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to take down the opacity of that layer about 60%. I'm going to go over it with a different color. Once again in pencil here, just because I want it to be still kind of loose. I want to just keep the energy. So I think there's some classic shapes, but there's a lot of versions of how you can kind of do a traditional rose. But you know how I've always appreciated them myself is, you know, people who really take and just take those classic shapes and then play on them. But like most things, you can't really play around with a lot of the structure if you don't really know what you're doing to begin with. And that's why I really recommend for a lot of people, you know, go and study an actual rose and try and hone that before you go and just try and draw your own traditional rose. Or if you're going to draw a traditional rose, just straight steal one. You know, find a really good one that you know is good, preferably probably from some classic imagery, classic flash, not just somebody's tattoo you saw on the internet. I know it seems like picking, you know, hairs there, that, you know, what's the difference between, you know, taking someone's tattoo or taking some old flash. But I think there is a difference. I think mainly the old flash, that's what it was meant for, you know. They put that out to be copied, to be used. So if you're not going to design it yourself, then yeah, I think the next best thing is to find some old flash and just play around with that. Another important takeaway I always think about too is, you know, I think of Picasso a lot of times when I'm thinking about traditional American or Japanese tattoos, or even anything stylized for that matter. You know, I really think like you can't really start to understand how to distort something, whether that's, you know, because if you think about American traditional or you know, illustrative type tattoos, they're all coming from a place of they're distorting the images that they're utilizing, right? So if we don't understand those forms first, we're not really going to be able to distort them. So I was thinking of Picasso, and if you look at Picasso's earlier work, it was very much more based in realism. All the forms were very much what they're supposed to be and the general shapes of what they're supposed to be. But he later on, after he really thought he had figured out the form of a lot of things, decided to play around with them more. And I think that's a pretty good example of how I recommend people to work, is like start to understand the forms, and then once you get the forms pretty well figured out, then you can really go down and start abstracting them. And that's really what traditional tattoos are, whether they're Japanese, American, anything like that. Once again, just being really loose here, and we're not being precious with our movements. We'll go around again like that. I like a little twist in there. All right. I like where that's generally at, so I'm going to hide the background layer, make a new layer, and I'm going to take the opacity down of the first pencil layer. Now for the new layer, I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use the monoline. I like this for traditional tattoos. It just gives it a real kind of bulky, fat, traditional line feel to it. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit, going to about 40% of its total size. And then I'm just going to start going over it. Now you can get real techie with a lot of this Procreate stuff. You can see my hand wobbles a little bit, and you can hold it and it'll actually, I don't know if you saw that, but see how it's a little wobbled here, but if you just hold the line after you pull it, it will straighten things out. Sometimes it's not always exactly how you want it. Like if it's just a singular line, that's great, but if you start doing really big curves or anything, it really it doesn't quite work. And sometimes like dramatic S curves, it just really can't understand either, so I don't really mess with it with that. I like doing the center first because I feel like that allows me to really see where all the weight is that I want and make sure that it's feeling right. I'm just going to go in here, just clean up some of those lines that went over a little bit. And then I kind of just like to go circular with a lot of the petals here. Work in a direction. Mainly work on starting the ones that feel like they're gonna play over top of things. And then go for the ones behind things. I don't really have a reasoning why I like to do it that way. It's just kind of how I like to do it. So that looks pretty good to me for the general shape. I'm going to go pretty traditional with this, where there's not a lot of flips on all the petals. To me, a lot of times that really feels kind of like mid-2000s to me, where there was like a flip on every petal. But sometimes it can look really cool. Like technically right here we could put a really cool flip or something if we wanted to. But I'm going to not do some things like that, as not to say that that's not traditional, but it's not the very, very classic early traditional that I'm trying to go for here. Say it's a little bit later era, into the 90s and early 2000s, that style becomes a little bit more prevalent. And it's not that it's right or wrong, it's just not an aesthetic I'm going for here. So I'm going to start working on the leaves and just some of the buds and stuff. I'm going to put in this bud because it kind of got that overlapping this leaf here. So now we can go behind that. And I like going and doing all the centers and all the outside shape of the leaf first to make sure I like the shapes that I have created, and then coming back and doing the inside lines, just because I feel like I want to make sure I like the shapes I've been creating. And if I don't like those, then because then I might come back and edit them. I like really kind of bulky leaves. These are a little bit more triangular in nature. And I feel like that plays to that really old style, like Sailor Jerry, Burt Grimm, and before. But I like really round leaves too, because if you really look at rose leaves, they're very round in shape. And so it's like, if you draw this, I'd say, try that in yours. Like if you like a more round shape, or you want a more, even more dramatic angle, it doesn't have to be just how I'm drawing mine. So that's looking pretty good. I like keeping the placement of the thorns pretty just rounded out. I try not to go with this style of traditional too detailed of sorts of how it is, because I feel like that once again lends itself to a later era of traditional tattoos. All right, we're gonna put this rosebud in. And I always like to think of traditional tattoos, whether they're Japanese or American or really any style, as kind of like economy of line. Like you want as few lines in the piece to show what an image is. And then you also want things to flow into each other. So really, I mean, if I thought about it, I probably should have pulled that line of this rosebud into the line of the leaf, because then you can just pull this line and boop, 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 and you could go along that. And that's what a lot of those early traditional tattooers were trying to do. They were trying to make as few movements as possible, because their stencils, they were using acetate stencils, and those acetate stencils would wipe away really, really, really quickly, because they were just like putting graphite on those. And man, if you think our classic purple stencil now wipes away quick, yeah, you should try those acetate ones. I've done it once, and I don't think I ever want to do it again. I'm not being super careful about how I'm putting these lines, because just a demonstration, and I just want to give you the general feel for something. I'm not trying to create a perfect illustration. More just trying, that would probably take a way longer video, and we don't need to sit around for that. Mainly I just like to get these on the same level so they're like touching in the same places from side to side. That's kind of my biggest rule of thumb, I would say, with that stuff. All right, so there's basically our outline. And let's make a new layer. We're going to make a layer below the line work. Once again, whenever I start doing color or other layers, unless I'm trying to distort the line layer, I always work underneath that layer in Procreate. So let's start with some black shading. I'm going to go ahead and use the grain shader. And this is from True Grit Texture Supply. They're a really awesome Procreate and Photoshop brush company, and they've got lots of great brushes and stamps and everything, and I use a lot of their stuff when I'm making like my nice prints and whatnot. A lot of stuff that gives a great amount of life to things. Okay, so I'm going to make this pretty big because I want to see a lot of that grain, and I'm going to just do sections and then erase them and do other sections, and probably make actually, you know, I'm going to make a couple more layers because I know I'm going to it's easier sometimes if you make a layer and then can just erase it and erase over top, and I'll show you how I'm doing that as I'm going. So we're going to start with this under petal here because I know that that's really going to be, we're going to go a little bit bigger. Same thing with over here. And I kind of like working a little bit all over when it's opposing places, and you'll see why here in a second. So now I can come back, I'll make my eraser real big, and I can just cut all along that edge. We're going to cut completely this one out because I'm going to go back and use a different layer for that petal. Same thing with this one over here on the right on the same side on the same plane. We're going to cut that completely out, and this top one. And that way, I like where all the shading's at in these three, and now I can go in a different layer and get the shading just how I want it for these ones. That's not quite right. Let's go a little bit bigger. Go a little nice and big on this side too. And then we can cut all that out, and we can be real. We don't have to worry too much about getting into these other sections at all, like if we touch them at all, like because it doesn't matter on a new layer. So yeah, that's why I really like utilizing layers constantly. Go back here and we'll do this one. Get that pretty big. Cut that out. And this just really saves you time in designing, I really feel, because you're not having to be too precious with how your movements, and you're getting the shape and the flow of like your shading and the way you want it. So we're going to take those two and we're going to merge them down. That way they're just one. And we'll go into a new layer here and do the black shading for the leaves. And you'll see here, I'm going to only do a couple because actually I shouldn't do that one. I'm going to go back and not do that one. All right, now we can go and once again cut back. And we don't have to worry about where stuff is right up next to stuff. Same thing with here. Boom. Like that. And if you can't quite see where things are, you can always take the opacity down of your shading layer, and it lets you see your lines a little bit easier. Sometimes I do that when I'm working on really detailed or layer pieces or I already have a lot of layers in them. And that helps you kind of just see where your shading needs to be erased next to a line without going kind of too far in or whatever. Alright, so now we're going to merge those ones, create a new layer, and finish the black shading in the rest of the leaves. Oh, you know what, I forgot to take out the shading in the centers of these ones. So I'm going to lower the opacity so I can really see that center line and keep really close to it. And that lets me take that center out of that I'll be adding color to later on. See, and that just really lets me see where it was and get it nice and clean there. Alright, now we'll go back to our new layer, finish its shading. It's going to take the opacity down so we can see that line, where things are. And that just really lets you keep your shapes clean. And I'm sure a bunch of you already know this stuff, but for anybody out there who doesn't, there's kind of quick, easy tutorials on this. Alright, we're going to merge that one down, do another layer. I'm going to go back in here and just clean up a couple things really quick. Oh, dang it, you know what, I gotta go back. Because that was, I forgot to up the opacity in that before I merged them. And that'll, if you do that, it'll save it basically as the lowered opacity, which you don't want, obviously. So I'm just cleaning up a couple things as I go here. Okay, another layer. I'm going to wait to merge. I'll merge all this stuff down at once. New layer, shade out this leaf. We'll shade the black for the stem. Go down a little bit, shade those out. And I'll clean all that up. I'm going to lower the opacity again so I can really get in clean next and tight next to this stuff. And I like the hard airbrush for most of my just bulk erasing stuff. Sometimes when I'm getting into fancy layers, like when I'm doing a lot of stuff with when I'm trying to create some realism in some stuff, then I will use like fancier layers. Like I have a saved, like I'll use the grain shader as an eraser, or I'll use like some of these like really muted stamps as an eraser, because I find it really, sometimes you don't want just a flat shape cut out of something. And I can show you on a print what I'm talking about here. I've done it a bunch of times. I used it a lot in my here's a good example. I use it a lot in this piece. So once I had all these layers combined to create depth and just not have every place. So there was already, I knew there was shine along the top of her arm, her shoulder, in this back area. So I took just a really subtle stamp and made it into an eraser, and I just kind of brushed over top a couple times of those hot spot where I knew light would be hitting in those areas, and that creates a little bit more depth and dimension to this, so it allows more realism in that. You can kind of see it in this piece too. I did it along the top of his arm. Like that shine wouldn't normally, it was there on the original photo, but I had to recreate that and dulling down some of that stuff that I painted over top. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the using different brushes for erasers. All right. Let's take a look at that. It's looking pretty good to me. Clean this all out of here. All right. Let's merge all these layers into one layer, so it just takes up less space. And I think we're good to start adding some color. I'm going to add the color underneath the black, because otherwise we'll lose a lot of that black. So create a new layer underneath the black, and I'm going to start with the green and the leaves. I have a bunch of saved palettes of what I like. I think I'm going to use this really deep green for the leaves. I'm going to try using a solid airbrush to fill these, but I may go back and not do that. But I'm going to try it first and see if I like it. What happened to that one? There, I guess I didn't make it. All right. So I'm going very traditional. I'm not actually going to use a lot of negative space in a lot of this. I feel like you see a lot of that stuff in like in the more 20s to early 50s time period. They didn't have a ton of kind of open skin in the tattoos. They just kind of chose an area. And I always try and at least make it so there's like 1/3 of the tattoo is open skin. But I think a lot of that early design choice comes from them pulling from Japanese tattoos. And I could be wrong. It might just be they're seeing illustrations and those are all fully rendered. But to me, the depth that Japanese tattoos are rendered in, colored in, I should say, probably lend to a lot of that aspect. And once again, that's just my opinion. I don't know that for fact. I'm just, like I say in the opening monologue of my first episode, I'm really coming from an enthusiast point of view, not an expert. I'm just one tattooer. I don't speak for everyone here. And hopefully soon here I'm gonna be getting some interviews, and more artists can talk on their process and why they make creative choices as opposed to other creative choices that could have been made. I just really like to understand people's process of kind of understanding the world, because that's what really art is. Art is our process of viewing the world through some lens, right? I think I like that. I'll probably leave a little bit more openness in the rows, even though I know they probably wouldn't have. Like most artists of this era would fill in most of this row just solid red. But I'm going to leave a little bit more what would be open skin, just so the tattoo does have some room to breathe. And we may go back, I'm just going to experiment with it really quick. Here I'm going to use the grain shader, but I'm going to use it as an eraser. Just to see I'm going to go real big because I want it to be real textured. I'm not sure I like that, so we're just going to go back on all that stuff. Put that back the way we have it. And maybe if I don't feel like I have enough open skin in the rows, then I'll go back and do some of that. Alright, so new layer, once again, underneath all the black layers, we're going to go a real crimson-y red for the rows. And I'm using the grain shader again here. And we'll probably end up making a couple layers for this one, but we'll see if that ends up happening. And I'll move my size up and down kind of as I'm going, because I know I'm not getting up to edges that I want, or I'm creating too much of an edge. So you'll notice that I'm not always staying at the exact same size. And that's on purpose. I think I like the majority of how that feels. I'll go real big here and just get a little bit of texture and some more of that. No, I don't like that. Alright, now let's take out and clean this up. Oops, I'm still on the grain shader, so we'll go back to the hard airbrush as our eraser. Clean up a bunch of this outside. And I mean, this is why doing Flash or doing paintings in Procreate, I mean, really is a huge step for making things easier for tattoo artists or artists in general. I mean, if I was painting this how I used to in watercolor, I would have to be so precise and so meticulous with my movements that I would probably this would take me hours and hours, instead of a little while. Alright, so now we're going to do a new layer so we don't touch any of that layer, and create and get some of the center stuff going on here. I'm just going to kind of, a little bit smaller. Go right from the center. So I like that general feel. Erase out from these flips here. Oops. Try that again, go a little smaller. So that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna add a little bit to this side. It feels a little not tight enough over there. And that's an important takeaway, I feel like, is, don't be afraid to just try it once and then go, oh, yep, that's it. It may take a couple times. I've used this program a ton, and I've drawn roses a ton. 20 years of drawing them. So, how quickly I'm able to do it and how quickly you may be able to do it might be two different things. All right, so now we're going to merge that down into the previous rose layer, make a new layer. I'm going to make a new layer and do some black. I think I want some black behind in the center just a little bit. So we're going to add that before I add some of this red again. I really want some depth in that area, in these areas here. Yeah, that looks better to me. Okay, now I'm going to merge that into the previous black layer, make a new layer for red. And this time I'm going to just use the airbrush because I know I want this center to be pretty much just a solid fill. Actually, I don't know if I like that. No, we'll use the grain shader. We'll just use it at a very small level. Just because sometimes when you use different brushes, it actually ends up creating a different color because they just have a different saturation level to them. And so, yeah, that's why I tend to try and use the same brush throughout the piece, at least with the same color, but, you know. All right, I like that for that. It brings a lot more openness to that. So let's get in the color to the buds here. Open up that brush a little bit more. That, can erase the excess. That heater finally kicked off. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and merge. All right, all that's merged down. I'm going to make a new layer. Let's find a good golden yellow. I like this one's kind of flat, almost ochre. And for this, I am going to use just the hard airbrush. I'm going to go pretty small. Go right behind all that stuff. And you can usually be pretty quick about it because it's going behind black and everything, so it usually doesn't have to. You may have to clean a couple things up just a little bit, but not too much. Put that same gold down here. Yeah, and I think that looks pretty good. There's a couple areas here I'm going to clean up, just so I can see that's playing into the layers behind. But that's pretty good. I'm going to go into the line layer here and just clean up a couple things that I see, just so this can be a really nice design to put on the internet later. But that's basically it right there in a nutshell. That's your traditional American rose, done in a little bit, I would say, earlier style, you know, somewhere between the 40s and 60s, you know, maybe even the 70s really, because they were really utilizing more that open space, I feel like. Anyways, there's my version of that. Thanks for tuning in again. I appreciate it. Remember to like and subscribe. Share this video with your friends if you found it useful or fun or interesting. And I hope to bring you a lot more videos in the future. Bye, y'all. Have a good day.